إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So today we're going to talk about the Shama'il of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that is his characteristics or character traits. And we're going to go over this book, Shamail al-Muhammadiyah, which is written by the famous Muhaddith Imam at-Tirmidhi, who is also the famous author of Sunan at-Tirmidhi. And so his full name is Abu Isa Muhammad bin Isa bin Sawra bin Musa bin al-Dhahhak al-Sunami al-Darir al-Bughi al-Tirmidhi al-Hafidh. And he is one of the famous scholars of Hadith, and he wrote the book al-Jami, and he also wrote a book in Ilal, or in the hidden defects in Hadiths. And he was famously a student of Imam Bukhari, and he was Imam Bukhari's most prominent students. And he shared with Bukhari many of Bukhari's teachers. So he also sat with the teachers of Bukhari. Most famously is Qutayba bin Sa'id, and Ali bin Hujr, and Muhammad bin Bashar, and others. And Tirmidhi, he died approximately 275, between 275 and 279 Hijri. So he's 3rd century Hijri, so he's very, very early in our history. And he died in the city or the village called Bugh. So that's why he has the name al-Bughi, because he's from a village named Bugh. And this village Bugh is in like the suburbs of Tirmidhi. So that's why he also has the name at-Tirmidhi. And this Tirmidhi is a very famous city where there was a lot of Islamic scholarship going on at this time. And it's located in the area that they call Ma Rawa an-Nahr, which means that which is beyond the river. And that is the river Oxus. And so in English, they call that area Transoxania. So this is kind of like Central Asia. It's like just above Horasan and Afghanistan. And some people even include this within Horasan. And Horasan is an area in northeastern Persia. And it's a very, very important place early on, especially for Hadith. And I also have this, I brought with this book here. This is the Sunan, or the Jami' of Tirmidhi. And in it, in the back, it has a biography of Imam Tirmidhi, and it also has the Shamail of Tirmidhi. So this one I bought here in Chicago. And in this biography, it says that his name is Muhammad bin Isa bin Sawra bin Musa bin Dhahhak al-Sunami al-Bughi al-Tirmidhi wa kunyatuhu Abu Isa. So his nickname was Abu Isa, and he was born in the village Bugh, from the villages of Tirmidh. And it explains here that Tirmidh is a city that's on the coastline, and this I guess you say big lake or sea, it was called in Arabic Jayhun. And he was famously the student of Imam Bukhari, and he narrated from Muslim and Abu Dawood and their teachers. And it mentions here again Qutayba bin Sa'id, Sufyan bin Waki', and Mahmud bin Ghailan, and Muhammad bin Bashar, and others. So these are important names because they'll come up a lot during the chains of transmission that we're going to read in the Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah. And so Tirmidhi, he traveled to Iraq, and he lived there for a while to seek all different kinds of Islamic knowledge, but especially ilm al-Hadith. So he traveled to Iraq to study Hadith. That's very important point because many of the great muhaddiths during this time were based in Khorasan and would travel back and forth from Iraq in Khorasan. And like I said earlier, he was the most famous student of Imam Bukhari, and he even got the nickname as Khalifat al-Bukhari, so like the representative or the vice regent of Bukhari. And he has the name al-Darir, which means the blind, because he was known for having a lot of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, khushu' of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so much so that he would weep and cry all the time. And also, when Bukhari died, rahimahullah, Tirmidhi was very, very sad and would cry even more from that. So he went blind from all of the crying that he did. And they say, usually in most of these historical kind of passages about him, that it was because of khushu' or khashiyat Allah, stuff like that. And so his sight left him. And then here in this particular biography of Imam Tirmidhi, there's even a poem here that was composed about him. And it says that this poem was composed in Andalusia, in Islamic Spain. And I think part of the reason that this isn't included here is because Ibn Hazm is famously known for saying, I don't know who this Tirmidhi guy is, basically. He says, Tirmidhi is majhul, he's unknown to me. And majhul is also a technical term in hadith sciences that means like he's unknown, so we can't narrate from him. So I think here they're including poetry that praised Imam Tirmidhi from Andalusia to say, no, actually he was known in Andalusia. So in a sense, it's a little bit of a refutation of Ibn Hazm probably. And here again, it's narrated that Imam Tirmidhi died around 279 Hijri. And so that's kind of what the historical sources in our tradition say about him. They don't know quite a lot, or there's not a lot that's transmitted about his particular life story. But we do know that he was a non-Arab and that he was Persian in descent from Khorasan. And like I was saying earlier, most of the great hadith scholars during this time were from Khorasan. And most of them, they were Persian in descent. So most of them, they were actually non-Arab. And so we have Imam Bukhari, who's from Bukhara, and we have Imam Muslim, who's from Nisabur, Nishapur in English, and we have Abu Dawud as-Sijistani. So all of them, they're from these Persian lands. Ibn Majah is from Qazwin or Qazvin, and Nasa'i is from this city called Nasa, and they're all in Khorasan or in that general area. And Khorasan was the core of where hadith teaching took place during this time. It was the main center of hadith knowledge, as well as Hanafi fiqh was also very widespread in Khorasan, and so was Sufism, the science of purification of the heart. And so there's another famous Tirmidhi from the same city and during the same time, and his name was Al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi. And so you have Imam at-Tirmidhi, the Muhaddith, and you also have Hakim at-Tirmidhi, who is famously known as a Sufi figure, but he was also a Muhaddith. And he has a very famous hadith collection called Nawadir al-Usul. And so one of the hadiths that's found in Arba'in al-Nawawi is from that collection. So it's a very famous collection in the tradition. Most people nowadays, they don't read it. But this area of Khorasan and Tirmidh in particular was known for the hadith sciences and Hanafi fiqh and also Islamic spirituality. And so there's this connection between Khorasan or Transoxania and Iraq. And there's like a long complex history as to why that is, but to try to give the best summary I can give, when the Arabs were conquering outside of the Arabian Peninsula, one of the first big battles that they had, they called it Ghazwat Qadisiyah. And this is one of the big battles that they had with the Persians. And all of this is in Tarikh al-Tabari, where they defeated the big general Rustam, Persian general, and after that huge defeat of the Persians at that battle that which took place in Iraq, they then built the garrison town that's known as Kufa. And from Kufa, they used Kufa as like a base, and from Kufa then they went to conquer the rest of Persia. And it was Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anh, who said that we need to conquer all of Persia because if we leave them alone, they're going to keep attacking us, keep attacking us, keep attacking us. So within about a year, or maybe even less than a year, all of Persia pretty much collapsed to the Arabs. And so large, I guess you would call it legions or troops, groups of soldiers, they went and conquered Persia, and they went all the way to Khorasan. Umar bin al-Khattab told them specifically to go to Khorasan. So in Khorasan settled a bunch of these Arab soldiers. And from that point on, they kind of went back and forth from Iraq to Khorasan. And still to this day, even when they do DNA tests on Iranian people, their DNA is 50% Arab because so many Arabs during this period went and settled over there. So there's always been a very strong connection between Khorasan and Iraq, and to this day, there's still a connection like that. And so that's a very important aspect. And so we have some famous scholars, even like Qushayri, who is from Iraq, who taught Radhakani, who taught Imam Ghazali, who was from Tus, also from Khorasan. And this was also during the Abbasid Caliphate. And afterwards, you had people from Central Asia, Central Asian Turks called the Seljuks. They conquered Khorasan, and from Khorasan, they went and they conquered Iraq. So it's like these places historically have always been connected. And when they did that, Horasan kind of fell as this place of learning. Like we're talking about during the time of Imam at-Tirmidhi, it was a strong place of learning, especially for Ilm al-Hadith. And when the Seljuks came and conquered that area, I think all the war and the chaos and the instability of it all caused that place no longer to be the center of knowledge, and it moved to Baghdad. And this is mainly because the Seljuks built a very famous school there called Madrasa Nizamiya, where Imam Ghazali is famous for teaching there. So there was a shift that happened after Tirmidhi's time. And I want to try to put this book, Shamail al-Muhammadiyya, in its like historical context. Because this is not like Sahih Bukhari, it's not like Sahih Muslim. It's a much smaller book, and it's books that are about the Prophet Muhammad and his characteristics. And the Hadith science, or you could say the whole knowledge of Hadith, it started with the Sahaba who were writing down Hadiths. And the different Sahaba would make their own Hadith collections they called Sahifas. And those Sahifas were later gathered by the scholars of Hadith, and usually the scholars of Hadith were also engaged in discussions of Islamic law or fiqh, and they would make a new type of collection that they called Musannif. And very, very famous Musannif, like the earliest one I think that we know of is Kitab al-Athar from Abu Hanifa. Another famous one is al-Muwatta from Imam Malik. And a bigger, more general one they call al-Musannif Abdur Razak as-San'ani. It's a very famous one. If anyone reads Arabic, that's a very easy one to get on PDF, and it's very, very good. It has a lot of the same hadiths that you'll find in Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, but it's much, much earlier. So the existence of that book is a refutation to a lot of the people who say that hadiths were just made up later on. You know, that in the early period they didn't exist. No, these books testify to the fact that they exist, and there's manuscripts that testify to the fact that these hadiths were written down much earlier time than originally thought. And then after the Musannif genre, what became popular was the Sahih genre that we see like with Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And then after that, starting mainly with Tirmidhi, you have this Sunan genre that the hadith were organized and collected and related to Islamic law and how relevant that they were to Islamic law. So they'll be ordered like an Islamic law book with the same chapter headings. And sometimes the hadiths in there, they won't be as sound or sahih as Sahih Bukhari. They may be of lower gradings, but they're pertinent to fiqh and they're still used in fiqh, and that's why they were included. And then later on, after that, it became where people decided to make hadith collections that were uh, based on certain topics that they wanted to discuss. So one of the first ones here is Shamail al-Muhammadiyah. So this one is a certain topic, and that is the character traits of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there were other ones that were made as well, like you have the Arba'in collections that were made too, where it'd be like 40 hadiths on a certain topic. And the reason it was 40 is because there's a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which basically says that if you are able to memorize 40 hadiths, then you can enter Jannah, more or less. That's what the hadith says. And so that's why that particular number became very popular. And this, they say, is the first type of book that is a collection of hadiths describing the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there was other type of Shama'il books that were written later on. A very, very famous one is a Shifa of Qadi Iyad. This one is recognized as a Shama'il book as well, even though it does more than just narrate hadiths. And there's one called al-Khasa'is al-Kubra from Suyuti. That's also a very famous one. But earlier, some other topical books is like Adab al-Mufrad from Imam Bukhari, which is, about adab, proper manners. You have like Riyad al-Salihin from Imam al-Nawawi. That's another one. Nawadir al-Usul, which I mentioned earlier. That's a collection that focuses on ethics, or pietistic literature is what they call it. Things to give you taqwa and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how to conduct yourself in everyday life. So that's kind of a little overview of the hadith books that existed during the time of Tirmidhi and before him. And I wanted to talk about this word Shama'il. A lot of people, they'll study this book Shama'il Muhammadiyah and never really learn in depth what the word Shama'il means. It's plural of the Arabic word Shamila. And that is a characteristic, moral strength or distinguishing quality, a custom, good trait or faculty, an imprint or a mark, nature, a mood, a disposition, a temperament, a mark or a sign or a distinguishing feature of a person. And there's a contemporary Shama'il book over here called Our Master Muhammad. It's been fully translated into English. And in Arabic, it's called Sayyidina Muhammad. And one of my main teachers, Sheikh Samir al-Nass, who transmitted the Shama'il Muhammadiyah to me, his teacher, Imam Sirajuddin, wrote that book, Sheikh Sirajuddin al-Husayni. He wrote the book Our Master Muhammad. And that is like a companion book to Tirmidhi's book, in the sense that it's a recent Shama'il book, but it covers different topics that this one does not cover. So it has hadiths in there that are not found in this book, and covers topics that are not found in Tirmidhi's Shama'il. So they're really good to read together in tandem. That's kind of my personal practice and what I do with those books and how I think about those books. So that's something important to think about. And alhamdulillah, the Shama'il Muhammadiyah of Imam Tirmidhi and Sayyidina Muhammad, they're both translated completely into English nowadays. And this is also related to the seerah of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When we learn about the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're learning more or less about the history, the early history of the ummah. And we're learning the history of all the things that our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through in his life, and how Islam began, how Islam was brought to us through the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so by reading the Shama'il, we get a really good idea, of who this person was. Who was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a human being? Not just the history of the different things that he did or the different things that happened to him, but how did he actually live his life? What was his dispositions? What was his character traits, what was all the way he moved, the way he talked, the way he dealt with other people is very, very important. And there is crossover, between the Shamail genre and the Sirah genre. And I'm going to mention some important points as to why it's mandatory upon us to know the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's from the pillars of Iman that we believe in the prophets. And how can you really believe in something if you don't know what it is? So it's important first and foremost that we know who the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is, and we know the other prophets too, so that we know actually what it is that we're believing and that we're not, in a state of confusion. So this is an aqidah issue. And also, by reading about the Shama'il of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's not merely just getting like some dry knowledge that we can like put in our brain, but it's also giving us a dhawq of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It's giving us a taste or an experiential knowledge as to who he was in a sense. And it's well known in Islam that loving the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is an obligation, and that we're supposed to love the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ more than we love ourselves, more than we love our parents, more than we love our children, more than we love our friends, and so on and so forth, more than we love money, more than we love the worldly life. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is our role model. It's his sunnah that we follow, his model that we try to imitate. So how can we claim to follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ if we don't know what the sunnah is, if we don't know how it is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually conducted himself in everyday life with everyday matters? How did he conduct himself with food? How did he conduct himself with drink? How did he conduct himself with clothes? And so on and so forth. And we can learn from him many, many great things like mercy, how to be merciful to human beings, how to have rahmah with all human beings, and how to have our humanity, how to keep our empathy when other people we see around us are suffering or maybe doing bad things. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, one of his names is an-Nabi al-Rahmah. And how can we embody that without knowing who really he was? And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was the carrier of the Quran. He's the one who brought us the Quran. So part of knowing the Quran is also knowing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because he was the one who brought us the Quran. And in the same kind of light, it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who ordered us to pray salah in the Quran. But the Quran does not have every detail about how to pray salah. We find that in the sunnah of our messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so knowing our messenger better, knowing his sunnah better, is going to help us have better and more accurate practice in our life as well. And this book, like I said, it really describes all the dispositions, all the characteristics, and the complete lifestyle of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all his idiosyncrasies. And it gives us a really good example as to what to do in everyday situation and principles that we can apply even in new situations and new circumstances in our life. So this book is really crucial for the everyday Muslim to know what it is to do in their everyday life and how to properly conduct themselves. And it brings for us this love for the messenger, this love for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and inculcates in us what you may say is like almost disappearing into the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That you try to embody the Prophet so much sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you start to have his characteristics and have his traits because you're imitating him to the best of your ability. And there was a very, very famous tabi'i named Sufyan ibn Uyayna. He was very, very famous muhaddith of the tabi'een. And he said the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the great balance. Whatever complies with his conduct, character, and guidance is the truth. Otherwise, it is falsehood. So this is a very great way to ground ourselves, to know what is the balance, what is truth, what is falsehood, what is the middle way, by knowing the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so today, what we're going to do is read this book in its entirety, and we're going to narrate the book. I'm going to narrate the book, to you guys and give you my chain of transmission. And that is called rawaya. And there's in hadith science, they always compare or put together in contradistinction al-rawaya with diraya. And so rawaya means to narrate, and diraya comes from the Arabic word dara, which means to know. So a common thing in Arabic, you say ma adri, I don't know. And so diraya comes from that same root. So diraya is to have understanding, or to have knowledge as to what the hadiths mean. So today we're mostly going to be focusing on the rawaya and trying to read the hadiths, but occasionally I may stop to give some diraya, to give some explanation, some sharh maybe on the hadith, or clarify something that may seem a little bit strange.